Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. Kia ora, Chewy, sir. How are you, love?
Kia ora, Pat. I'm
Cheers.
good. I assume Monday, as per our usual standards, will be a nice, quick 20-minute adventure in and out. Not much has happened. All is well. So we won't need to stick around, right?
No, just be a quick one. I reckon 9:15 we're all done.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. Frosty, think. Oh, look at this. Straight away I'm getting shamed by the chat. Look at that.
How dare you, Frosty?
How dare you?
How very dare you?
How do you know what it is? I washed and shampooed, and when I wash and shampoo it goes so that says to me, okay, time for a cut. So yeah. Thanks, Frosty. Your beard shamer. Apparently officially it's a neck beard right now, Joey. I still don't quite know what that is, but that's what it is. Anyway, interesting show tonight. Some bits and bobs going on. A couple of smaller stories. One based around a protest that happened in Wellington over the weekend, involving Tori, Whanau, and a bunch of people, as to the ongoings in one of Te Papa's halls, reception rooms, and also this conversation. And I'm really fascinated with this conversation about this former Shortland Street actor going on a hunger strike. Because I'll be honest with you, I have reservations, and I'll tell you what.
This sounds like news.
It's the cause we are on board with. It's all about Gaza, but I have reservations, and I won't. I know I always kind of. I don't keep my powder dry very well, and I always give away secrets, but I'll tell you why, right? I have reservations, not for the cause, not for the heart, but the practical side of it and what's going to happen. Sorry to be a Debbie Downer, but that's what it is. And of course, Chloe was on Q&A over the weekend, so we have to have a look at that, and she did pretty well. The thing I liked about it a lot was, compared to many of the government ministers when they go on, when Jack asked her a question and she needed to know the answer, she gave an answer, Chewy. It's so bizarre. What? It's like, this is the answer. Even a hard one, this is the answer. And what happened was, even things that were a bit uncomfortable and awkward in the questioning, like he didn't let her off or anything, she had an answer for. And I'll show you a few of those. But then there was another part of the conversation when she started to talk a bit about the personnel issues that they're having at the Greens at the moment. And I think she missed a messaging moment there as well. So it's a good interview to demonstrate to those people who like to accuse the left of being all wokesters and, still receiving little brown envelopes from Auntie Helen, that most journalists, most people in the media, if they see a conversation to talk to, even if it's difficult for the guest, no matter who they are, they do. So yeah. Let's also say very quickly, because we have a guest waiting in our green room, a huge thanks to all our patrons. It was lovely to have a bit of a Patreon meetup on Saturday morning. Nice to see you there for 7 minutes, Joey. Lovely that you decided to turn up. 7 minutes. I'm kidding. I'm joking. It's lovely. And just remember, well, I'm only being mean. I'm paying it forward because of what Frosty just said to me. I need to remind you all that we've got a new finishing credit with a new AI-generated theme song, which will play at the end of the show over the credits with all the names of our patrons, and probably a couple of names of people who aren't patrons yet, because I haven't quite figured out who's left. So we'll see. But because we're doing it that way now, it's a bit harder to put the names up in front of you now. So let me just mention, watching from a distance, Josh Kendrew, Finn Handley, Gareth Bayliss, Winston Smith, lovely boy. Was that Winston Smith, actor from America? It ain't half hot, man. Oh, lovely boy. A really deep voice. Winston someone. Fry, Jasmine Heppy, and Chris Fransham, who all joined up in the last week or so, a few days. So we thank you very much for being on board. We appreciate what you do. You guys already know that with your help in Patreon, when the audio desk blew up, we were able to replace it and just keep going without a hitch, thanks to patrons. So you really genuinely help us keep on doing what we're doing. Anything you want to add, Troy, before we rip into this week?
No, not particularly. Let's get into it.
Let's get. Sounds like starting to a boxing match or a wrestling match.
Let's get ready to rumble.
Well, you can't say that. We'll have to pay a royalty. It's got royalties from Mr. Ring Announcer. Let's say welcome to the show, Kieran Malcolm-Nulty from Labour. Kieran, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no worries. How you getting on?
Very well, actually. Very, very busy. Very good to have you on board. Thank you so much for coming on board and saying g'day to us. I thought what we'd do is, because I saw you on the news talking to the Kainga Ora conversation, we'd reach out and see if you wanted to talk about it in a bit more detail. We love TVNZ News. We love News Hub. But, the 18 seconds they give you, we think maybe we can talk a bit more to it. We just think we could. So I thought what we'd do is, everyone's down with it, down with the kids and that, is maybe play the story from One News tonight, the Kainga Ora story, which gives a little bit of background, and then expand upon it. Because apparently now Kainga Ora bad, and rattling sabres of cuts needed, which of course leads those of us who are pessimists to worry about things like private partnerships and privatization. None of that's been said, but those of us who like to jump to conclusions tend to go in that direction. But let's have a look at the story together, and then let's talk about it at the end. Thank you for joining us again, Kieran.
A scathing review of public housing agency Kainga Ora has found the performance of the country's biggest landlord is deteriorating as it racks up billions of dollars of debt with little accountability. The report recommends a shake-up at the organisation, and a new chairman has already been announced. But organisations working with those in need say the government must continue to build more homes despite rising costs. Political editor Mikey Sherman reports.
Kainga Ora, the country's biggest social housing landlord, on notice from the government.
We've not been satisfied with the performance of Kianga Ora in managing its finances and its assets.
An independent review led by former Prime Minister Sir Bill English has delivered a scathing report saying the performance of Kainga Ora is deteriorating. Kainga Ora is not financially viable, it is not delivering the homes and support people need, and cites a lack of transparency and accountability, limited attention to value for money, and a poor understanding of tenant outcome.
Now, some of those sentences, Chewy and Kieran, probably the most frightening is Kainga Ora is not financially viable. When I hear that, I think Kainga Ora provides a service primarily. And I know it's on a different scale, but it feels a bit like saying libraries, yeah, right, libraries aren't financially viable. It seems to be something that's more of a service than not. And if it's not financially viable, what is this government then going to do with it? Seem to be focused so much on the bottom line. We're going to keep going as well, Kieran, but would you like to speak to that before we go?
Yeah, that line stood out for me too. And what was really front of mind was the bloke that ran this review was finance minister for 9 years when that government extracted a dividend from Housing New Zealand. So, I think that's the lens by which they're looking at this. We don't see Kainga Ora or the provision of social houses as an opportunity to extract revenue for the government. We see it as a platform to build houses for Kiwi whanau. It's as simple as that. And that's the fundamental ideological difference between National and Labour, or the right and the left.
Yeah, and there as well, the second line from the bottom, limited attention to value for money. That smacks of, I want a return on my investment. I want to see a financial dividend to the investment that the country is making, which kind of speaks to what you're saying, I think, a little bit, Kieran.
Yeah, it does. I do want to say one thing, though, is that, of course, we should ensure that money that's spent is value for money. But I was going to speak to this later, but further on in this clip, Mikey Sherman mentions that it's cheaper for community housing providers to build houses. That's actually inaccurate. It is Kainga Ora builds houses cheaper per square metre than community housing providers. So there's your value for money. So I reckon we should just strike a line through that one.
Okay, let's do that, and we'll keep on going.
Today is about fixing the finances of Kainga Ora, or at least starting the process.
Kainga Ora has total assets of $45 billion and annual expenditure of $2.5 billion, but its debt grew from $2.7 billion in 2018 to $12.3 billion in June last year, and is forecast to almost double that in 4 years' time.
So maybe what we've got you here, Kieran, explain that to us. It's gone up 10 billion over 6 years, and then going to be another, then it's going to double in the next 4 years because
there's a massive figure missing in this graphic, and that's what the total assets were in 2018. So you got 3 at the bottom there, and you've only got 2 at the top. And if they had total assets in 2018, it would tell the complete picture, because debt has grown, but so too have the assets. And that 12.3 billion is roughly a quarter of the total assets. if we look back to the Housing Corporation back in the 80s and 90s, they were leveraging at 80% debt to equity. So actually, when you consider in 2018, when New Zealand Housing was simply a body that National had stripped down, that was transferring houses from the state to community housing organisations or selling them, it's gone from that to an organisation that has $45 billion of assets, that has created 14,000 public houses alongside community housing providers, and out of that has $12.3 billion of debt. So there's the context there, which I think is really important to understand the full picture.
Do we have any idea, or do you know the numbers for 2018? What the how much was the asset value of Kainga Ora?
As I was screaming out for some context there, I was thinking, God, I really wish I had that number on me.
What about projecting when we have 23 billion? Obviously, it's because houses are being built and properties are being built, and that costs money. Is there any projection for the 23 billion? Once it's 23, is it going to therefore be $90 billion worth of assets? Is it going to double and double? Or?
It's projected to peak within a few years, and then the relative scale of the assets to the debt will mean that debt will start to reduce. Now, I know that this is a long way away, but we're talking about 70-year assets here. By 2060, there will be over $250 billion of assets there and $9 billion debt. So there's the trajectory. So you can draw the lines between now and 2060. This is as it should be when you're considering a government department that is only a matter of years old and was required to hit the ground running right from the get-go. It would be inaccurate to say that they started from a standing footing, because actually they started behind the starting line, because in the 9 years of National, they ended up with 1,500 fewer houses than what they started on. And so not only did we have to try and fill that void before we built some houses, we also had to maintain the ones that they neglected over that 9-year period. So I'm afraid this just doesn't quite tell the full story.
Yeah, and speaking of the full story, because we have the smartest viewers in New Zealand, Peter's just come up saying the 2018-2019 annual report says assets of 28.6 billion. So
thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.
So in other words, we've now got 45 billion. We had 28 billion. So yeah, I mean, I know this is oversimplification and some people shouldn't do this, but if I had $1 million worth of debt on $2 million worth of property, and I doubled it to $2 million worth of debt, but I had $50 million worth of property, it's not just about that number, is it? About what you're getting for it and what the equity you have and whatever it is, the assets you have for it as well.
I'd like to think that a future government would never sell down that asset, but what it means is that the ability to be able to leverage that in future to then build more houses is far greater. And so, I'm sure we hear it all the time. I certainly do, by those that might not be completely engaged in politics will say, oh, there's not much difference between National and Labor. Well, I would argue that in workplace relations and in housing, you've got two prime examples where there are gulfs between the two.
Isn't it funny, Chewy, when you have like time to talk out an issue rather than 18 seconds on the news, you can kind of get to the nub of it every now and again. Chewy, do you want to jump in now? Or should we keep going? You can save your firing to the end.
Voting block happy if you give context to your numbers. Look at how the numbers start small and get big. Labor bad. Yeah, look, if you were a private landowner, maybe say a landlord, and were leveraging debt to get more assets, the bank would be sweet with it. Yeah, because capital gains is a thing. The value is only going to go up, right? Well, you can't have a government organisation doing that. Luckily, we don't have a housing crisis and everybody has a nice, safe home.
Well, the cheapest day to build a house
that's what I said.
Yeah. And of course, we've had 7 months of nothing. I know we're partway through a clip here, but they came into office promising that they would build more houses than Labor. And when you consider that the number of houses that were built in the last 6 years was the highest number since the 1950s, that was a pretty big claim. And in 7 months, they haven't announced a single policy that has led to an additional house. In fact, their refusal to commit to funding beyond 2025 has led to the likes of Salvation Army to cancel developments because they don't have funding security and they simply can't take on that risk without knowing whether the money's coming or not.
Gotcha. So extra value for private landlords because they know that there's not any dilution of the supply coming. So then when you've got people that need housed and private rentals and are getting the accommodation supplement topped up, we're still paying for housing. It's just we don't own it. The country doesn't own it.
The irony here, unfortunately, is that this is assuming that National will be making some announcement around funding for housing at the budget. They didn't wait for the budget to announce $2.9 billion of tax cuts for landlords, but they're dragging their heels and refusing to commit whether they're funding additional public housing places beyond 2025. Well, as a direct result of that decision and that choice, the momentum is stalled. And this is at a time when the arse is falling out of the construction sector and literally hundreds and thousands of tradespeople are leaving for Australia because their bosses are telling them, we don't have much work beyond next month.
Yep. And then they won't be able to get them back and that'll make it 10 times worse. We're going to keep rolling.
Of record training of apprentices. Well, we've put all that investment in and they've buggered off to Aussie. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all.
All right, let's keep rolling with the story and then we'll come back to some more chats.
Isn't it, by and large, simply the reality of needing to build housing on a large scale to meet a housing crisis?
Well, that is true to some extent. The Crown and the government and Cabinet is worried about that level of debt because ultimately that's on the Crown balance sheet. New Zealanders have to borrow that money to pay for that.
We had to set it up from the ground. And we've just...
It's a good looking chap, don't you think, Chewy? It's a good looking chap in front of the TV right now, eh?
Very
Nicely.
smooth.
Good. I know that there's not going to be no one in our chat complaining about the standard of your beard. It's all looking good. Kapai.
Delivered around 14,000 public homes through both community housing providers and Kainga Ora. It's like they've only just realised it costs money to build houses.
I think it's a choice the government has to make, and I would like to see it put investment into building new homes for people because that's where the need is. We need more houses.
Auckland community housing organisations want financial assurance from the government.
They agreed that they would build 1,000 new state houses annually, and the need is great. So it is important that they remain true to that commitment.
We want to grow the number of social houses in New Zealand. That's a different issue to whether or not we want the number of state houses owned by Kianga Ora to increase.
And on state houses, one...
Hang on. I'm going to go back for that because I missed that on the night as well. It sounds like you're saying we want more social houses, but maybe Kianga Ora aren't the people to do it. I just want to listen to that again. I'll pause it after this comment. I can see you firing up, Chewy. Let's just have a look.
Social houses in New Zealand. That's a different issue to whether or not we want the number of state houses owned by Kianga Ora to increase.
So more social housing, but maybe we'll put to the side of the conversation Kianga Ora leads to what, Chewy?
That leads to more private landlords, whether it is through social housing, through religious charity groups or some other charity structure or public-private ownership, that sort of thing. He's just decided against all evidence since before World War II that the best social housing project is one that the government runs and can do at massive scale. That doesn't work. Never works. How many New Zealanders got raised in state houses?
Bro.
Yeah, and what is the problem that we have been talking about and various governments acknowledging, denying, doesn't happen? We don't have a housing crisis. John Key said that for years. No such thing. Never mind. Don't worry about it. People living in cars, it's fine. Sweet as. It counts as a roof. And then we have, during the Ardern government, this massive binge of housing, like a generational run of building more houses. And no one's going to keep that up. These guys aren't going to do it because it's going to affect the bottom line of landlords. More supply of housing, lower rents. This is the downward pressure that they are so keen on, but they're not going to do it. You want to bring a price down, you add more of the product. That is just basic economics.
We're not going away from the story, but we'll just come for a second because I to be honest, I missed that when I was queuing this all up. I watched this on One News and I watched it again and I missed it. I just heard it then for the first time. Kieran, you're obviously in that building yelling at those people across the house. What do they mean when they're saying, yeah, more social housing? Absolutely. Maybe not for Kainga Ora though. What does that mean? And how do you guys react to that?
Well, what I'm about to say is not even a paraphrase or an interpretation. I can repeat what he said in the press conference because he went to some effort to clarify what he meant. By social housing, he means the provision of housing not by Kainga Ora, but by community housing providers. That is entirely consistent with their position leading up to the election, and it is entirely consistent with the entire 9 years of the Key and English government. The National Party do not believe that it is the state's responsibility to provide houses. They believe it's their responsibility to fiddle around with planning laws and help facilitate community housing providers to do what I would wager the three of us and many of the people watching would think is actually the state's responsibility. And that's the crux of the problem. We've been down this road before. We've heard this rhetoric before. And where we ended up was with 1,500 fewer houses, because if the government doesn't help community housing providers pay for the new builds, they don't happen. And what I mean by that is through the income-related rent subsidy. So when people talk about social houses, they mean tenants in a house that pay no more than 25% of their income on rent, and the rest is topped up by the government. And that security of funding is all that the community housing providers need to go and sign off on a new development and build new homes, because they know that that money will come through. But the government hasn't committed to that funding. They didn't through the 9 years of Key government, and they haven't so far in this government. And all that will happen is that the progress that we've made will stall and go backwards. And that was the massive omission from today. If they came out today and said, we are going to confirm the funding beyond 2025 for the next 4 years, or for 6,000 houses like we did in our manifesto, then we actually would have acknowledged that. We still would have made many of the points that we did, but at least they've given the sector certainty. But they don't still know where they stand. And it's just not going to go anywhere. It's just a fact. There's so many examples that we can point to demonstrate that.
It's I don't want to go down a let's beat up the media conversation here, but it's not just that the government leaves out numbers or leaves out real information. It's that the media then doesn't nail it down. So this is a TVNZ report on the news. Fair enough, but we're losing more and more of that kind of intelligent, let's dig down into the numbers now and actually tell people what they're saying. And if they had just whipped by and we hadn't seen it, then they would have said it and it would have been like, yeah, we've always said that the whole way through. It does concern me.
I will give Mikey some defense here, is that I imagine that the inclusion of that statement was a deliberate choice to provide context into the story. And it was as a result of her asking, isn't the financial position of Kainga Ora simply as a result because they have built a record number of homes in very difficult 6 years? And he conceded that that was correct, and then went on to say, well, actually, our position is that we want more social houses, but maybe not by Kainga Ora. I think that's incredibly telling, and the fact they included that does provide that context. But I do concede, though, that you sort of need to understand some part of the incredibly complex situation where we've got the funding streams for this and the difference between state houses and social houses and public homes and income-related rents, et cetera, Mate, it took me a while to get my head around the portfolio. Yeah. But I asked for it for a reason, because I'm bloody passionate about it. And if we've got time, I'll give you brief explanation as to why. I live in Masterton, and in 1999, the national government sold every single state house in my region to the local licensing trust.
Wow.
Ooh.
And, you know, they've done the best they can, but they are a licensing trust. And for the first few years, you know, it takes some time to get your head around the complexities of running community housing. And so between when they sold them and when we came in 2017, the number of public homes available to the Wairarapa community went down by the hundreds because they weren't supported by the government. There was a period where the demand wasn't there, so there wasn't the need. But then during the key years, the demand shot through the roof, but the funding wasn't there. And I fought incredibly hard as the local MP to bring government housing back to Wairarapa. And I'm bloody proud to say that I did. And it's only because Kainga Ora came back to Wairarapa and the Tararua district that they had the first public houses built in 20 years. And it's the only way it happens.
Yeah. Just before we move on as well, just to want to reiterate that point about what Mikey asked about, you know, building houses. To go back again to the 2018, $2.7 billion worth of debt for $28 billion worth of assets. They add 10, you guys add $10 billion, so it's now 12.3, and have about $20 billion more worth of assets. That seems like a pretty good return on investment. $10 billion for an additional $20 billion worth of assets from what we had when you guys got in.
And
so,
it's a generational change. It's not what they're doing is they're pointing at that graph of number go up. Number go up is bad, but it's not going to ramp like that forever. Eventually, we're going to reach a point where we have enough social housing. You know, all of these houses that have been sold, all of these houses that had to be brought up to a healthy home standard because they were houses that were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, are now replaced.
They needed to be upgraded as well. So a lot of the funding that went into Kainga Ora was not just to build homes, but to was actually bring the old stock up to grade.
And people need different types of houses now. The idea of a 3 or 4 bedroom home with a quarter-acre section is incredibly outdated. It's not how we live now, and we can get more housing into that space. And like everything that this government seems to want to talk about, it's at very shallow level. They don't talk about the flow-on benefits like you were saying of like, okay, so now our building companies and our apprentices are up against the gun and they're looking at other countries. They don't look at those benefits. They don't look at the things that they would improve right throughout the country, right throughout all of our communities of like, here are workers getting paychecks and staying in this country and starting families and all of that flow on. It just seems there is always a very surface profit and loss statement way of approaching every problem that we have in this country.
Yeah. It's like this government doesn't put any value, financial value, in social good, although that has to always be a part. Like they ignore it. They think it's not a part of the equation. Or they might verbalize that it is, but their actions say that they don't value the social good of whatever the policy is above the financial return or the investment into it financially or the, you know, the profit and loss column, and they stop about there. And they say, we can't, as they're giving $3 billion back to landlords.
And I think especially coming from Bishop, MP for Hutt South, where hundreds of state-owned houses were knocked down, demoed, tried to be sold off, and empty sections sitting there for years during a housing crisis. That was his electorate. So I can't see how he would be unaware of that.
The interesting thing is, you're right, they do choose to look at things from a financial or an economic point of view while discarding the social cost. But if we were to leave that to one side and just look at a financial situation, they haven't talked about the cost of homelessness in a financial sense, and not only the cost of emergency housing. They've been rattling on about that for years, and yet they don't see the connection between building state houses and saving money on emergency housing, or the cost of the health system, etc., etc. The cost of families that have to move from region to region because they have unstable households and going from school to school, etc. None of this is factored in. They just look at the cost and the debt, and that's it. And it doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of the whole story, let's just get back to it, HOE, and we'll get back to this, and then we can wrap at the end and let Kieran go before midnight, just to be fair. So let's get to the end of the story.
And on state houses, one big call.
I can rule out a mass sell-off of state houses.
While plenty of other decisions are still to be made.
Mass.
All right, a lot of decisions ahead, Mikey. So what happens from here?
Well, the report made 7 recommendations. The government has already accepted 4 of those recommendations, including a complete renewal of the Kainga Ora board. Now, that is essentially a vote of no confidence in the Kainga Ora leadership. But there are other...
One wonders the colour of the political party the new board will support. One wonders.
Adhere issues the government still needs to consider, including whether community housing providers should build more of the social housing stock because they deliver it at a more cost-efficient model product than Kainga Ora does at the moment. The government also wants to scrap Kiwi Build. No great surprise, but it needs to decide what it will replace that with. It is also putting question marks over some of the housing funding schemes. Think the first home loan and other progressive housing schemes. The government wants to decide what it does with those, saying Kainga Ora has simply had too much on its plate. Now, all of those decisions which remain unanswered, still to be determined, they will be covered off in a report back at the end of the year.
So, as I said, Bill English did the report, I believe. The board's gone, and one can only hazard a guess at the colour of the politics of the new board coming in, Chewy.
A fantastic independent inquiry headed by an ex-national leader and prime minister who was part of a government that sold off state houses fucking wholesale. I love that. How far can we stretch the word independent before it's completely transparent? What a fucking joke. It's a job system for mates.
But it's also a stupid thing to say because we all know this. But if it was the other way around, and there was a former Labour minister or Green minister outside of there, James Shaw got put in charge of that or something like that, that National would be having conniptions over the wrong person and the bias of the reports coming out and stuff. And they just go and do it. And if you weren't here, Kieran, I'd probably say both sides will do it. It's a frustration of politics, but, it's this thing's particularly egregious.
Yeah, I would say it's the equivalent of a future Labour government in many, many years to come, putting Megan Woods as chair of a review in Kainga Ora. But there's a massive difference. That would be, and we'd be totally transparent that we want to build houses. And so we put a minister who has a track record of building houses to review an organisation to see how they could build more houses. They should be transparent and say, we don't believe it's the state's role to build houses. So we're going to get the bloke that oversaw the reduction of state houses to review it so that we can see the best way to transfer houses from the state to the community housing providers. That would be honest. But they haven't said that, even though they've alluded to it in the campaign.
Chewy, we can let Kieran go shortly, but what are we wrapping up with? There's a few chats and stuff in there. Is there any questions directly for Kieran that we want to to him, or anything else you want to add?
Control. I want to cover off a couple of things. Like my dad is renting and gets an accommodation supplement, and the place that he's in at the moment is a basement rat hole in Timaru, charging absolute top dollar rent, and that's topped up by MSD. And so that's always my comparison. It's like we're paying for that right throughout the country. People in private rentals where landlords can just charge whatever the fuck they want because it's market rent. And the government's making the choice of doing that through accommodation supplements rather than spending the money and building a more generational approach like housing. That's not right? That doesn't sit right. And that's been a problem for decades. decades now, accommodation supplement has been a rort for private landlords. What, if we knock these guys out in a one term, hopefully, what would be your approach to solving that problem?
The best thing to do is to, one, remove the stigma of income-related rents and government or community-provided houses, and look at places like Vienna, where it's ingrained in their society, and a massive proportion of people live in these houses. They know they've got them for life. There's no stigma attached to it. There's no government subsidies of private rentals because the local government has provided enough housing for its people for 100 years, and the society is committed to that and say that that is a home is a right, and they will ensure that it happens. And essentially, if there is enough houses for people, there'll be less pressure on the private rental market. That will stabilise, and there'll be few instances where people need to access the accommodation allowance. It's a simplified response, but it's pretty straightforward. And what worried me, since you've mentioned accommodation allowance, what worried me is Chris Bishop referred to housing associations as a potential solution to this. Now, this is derived from the UK model, and this is something that they've been looking at for a long time. I came across a 2010 report that Bill English commissioned, which referred to the UK model. Now, of all the examples of social housing provision in Europe, UK would be the last one that I would point to as an example of what to do. The right to buy scheme that Thatcher brought in allowed a lot of state housing or council housing tenants to buy their homes. Great, that's awesome. But she then blocked providers from building new houses. And over a couple of generations, those houses were inevitably sold to landlords. And so the tenants in those houses have to get accommodation supplement from the state. So that society has paid for those houses and the provision of houses 3 times, building them, subsidising the sale of them, and now subsidising the rent of them back to private landlords. It is a disaster. And it is one of the least affordable markets in Europe. It is just crazy in my mind that we would want to look to emulate that when we've got a system that, yes, it's expensive, but, you know, that's the nature of building houses. But we were getting there, and people could see that houses were being built. So they saw some hope. So they would actually put their hand up to go on the register. If the national government under Key built houses at the rate we did, we wouldn't have a housing crisis. It's as simple as that. History is going to repeat itself.
Yeah, national reading the Tories' notes seems to be a theme, and a very worrying one. My second question for you is to do with something close to home down here in Dunedin. Are you familiar with the Arran Court Lodge?
I am, actually.
Yeah, so that was, for those that don't know, is a motor park here in Dunedin that was bought for COVID response, MIQ, and then the Kianga Ora took it over with the intention of building social housing. Here in Dunedin, we have a homeless encampment next to the motorway, and a big piece of property that was bought for social housing that has sat empty ever since. That obviously started under Labor. What's happening here? I mean, you say you're familiar with it. Is there anything that you would like to add about where that's at, or what pressure the current government is under to do something with it?
I became aware of it because the minister was on local radio a couple of weeks ago, I think, and was asked about it. And then that came up on my media feeds. I basically get an alert on any housing story that's published in New Zealand media. So I looked into it. I'm still looking into it as to why that is. There is some difficulty in developing that land. I know that much. And it's not as straightforward as a piece of land that was purchased and they're sitting on it and have just decided not to do anything with it. It's not straightforward. I know that the intention is to develop that land because it is close to transport links, and you can actually get quite a lot of houses in there. But so often, particularly when things were bought for one purpose, like in COVID, and then they think, well, we've got this, so we may as well look to develop it. It's not an easy transfer.
Right.
So look, I don't want to make excuses. Obviously, we want to develop the land. I just point out that it's not as straightforward as perhaps it's being portrayed.
All right. And Chewy's done a lot of work on that as well. I don't know if the story you saw was Hamish from Stuff down here who wrote about it, but I think it's fair to say, Chewy, you fed him a bunch of information that potentially started getting that story going. So that's a bit of a passion
I
project.
walk past it every day.
Yeah.
And I'm just, someone in that homeless encampment died earlier in this year, and we're going into another winter of people living in tents. And it's one of those things that you're just like, there's a roof there, at the bare minimum.
Yeah. We particularly if there's any land that has been built for housing, we need to make sure that we can do whatever we can to build on that. Casting aspersions over the credibility of Kainga Ora and its long-term viability, and whether or not it should indeed exist for that purpose, is not going to result in a speedy outcome for that development, I'm afraid. I have very little faith in the intentions of this government because I believe that they have been disingenuous. You may remember the Chris Luxon's State of the Nation speech earlier in the year. He stated that when they became in government, there was a piece of advice sitting on their desk that said that Kianga Ora was going to sell 10,000 homes. And they used that to question the viability of Kianga Ora. Well, actually, it turns out after doing a bit of digging and asking some questions and official information and all that sort of stuff, it wasn't sitting there. Nicola Willis actually commissioned that advice. And it was as a result of a conversation with the Secretary of the Treasury, which MHUD and Kianga Ora have confirmed to me that it was as a result of an indication that there may not be funding post-2025. And the advice that Kianga Ora was likely to sell 10,000 homes was on the assumption that there wouldn't be additional funding. But that's not how they presented it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's dishonest. And just an example that they have taken every opportunity, whether legitimate or not, to try and discredit Kianga Ora.
Kieran, I feel like you're part of the whānau now because you come on board for a 15-minute chat and we talk for 40 minutes. So that's official. This is sort of how we roll in our 90-minute hours. So thank you so much for giving us some time. I was going to say one more thing. You were talking about looking to Vienna as a good example of perhaps how housing is handled. Like if you guys needed like a fact-finding trip, I'm sure me and Chewy could, put ourselves forward to head across there and find some information for you and bring it. Are you up for that, Chewy? A fact-finding trip to Vienna? Yeah. So just look, we like to give, so we're just offering, Kieran, if you'd,
Well, look, I mean, I'm sure if that can be arranged, who knows, there might be some sponsors that are watching that said, yeah, that might be a good use of our funds. I've got a good mate of mine from Marston that's over there. I'm sure he'll be able to show you around.
There you go.
A cultural tour as well as a housing tour.
BHN meetup in Vienna. Sounds like a good thing. Hey, Kieran, thanks so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate your time. We will keep on going and we'll be in touch when we want to hear more than 18 seconds on TVNZ News.
Cheers, lads. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
No, anytime.
Cheers,
all the
mate.
best.
Champion.
We're
going to have to come up with a thing where, like I think it's Saturday Night Live when a host comes back for a fifth time, they get a smoking jacket. Maybe we need to do something like that.
I think Robert Patman might be up for one of those already. Then probably.
Yeah, true.
You want to do some chats while I get a drink? Because I'm
parched. Yeah. There's so many, and okay, so let's have a go. First of a couple of comments from the looks of it here. Legified. There's a conundrum of the housing crisis. Houses as a tradable asset in a market against the very real social need to provide homes for people.
Yeah. That's the thing that I was saying before. When I said obviously relating it to, it's like saying we need profits from a library. Obviously, it's different economies of scale, but this government doesn't seem to understand that not everything has to have a financial return. You know, like when we always used to talk about it before the election, it's like you don't run a country like you run a business. This is all the bullshit that we've heard. Businesses are actually legally, you are legally forced as best you can to return profit to your shareholders and dividend to your owners, right? If you ran a country like that, Kainga Ora would be shut down pretty quick, because it's not a money-making scheme. It's a service-providing entity, and that's the difference.
The dividend doesn't have to be a cash dividend. It can be a social dividend.
Yeah.
Healthy, homed, educated children.
Yep.
Become healthy, well-adjusted adults
who actually will give a financial return to the country through taxes and stuff, because they'll be better equipped to actually go into the world as, you know, working, functioning adults. And so there is actually a financial return, but maybe not at the end of the week with number 75 Main Street. Maybe it's at the end of the decade with the then 23-year-old who's graduating from university to become a doctor. That's the financial return.
If you go into a children's ward full of kids with respiratory illnesses because they grew up in damp, cold homes, I tell you what, that's a drain on the government coffers as well. The second part of Lectify's comment, and the macroeconomic effect of trading internationally or dying, plus a domestic economy fixated on house price speculation. Now, I've gone on tangents about that before. Our whole economy is based on trading old houses to each other. That cannot stand. That's dead money. It's not growth. We have an economy that is not productive. Now, National keep going on that they're the party of the economy, but they clearly don't understand economics. They can't see the benefit that if it was a better return for people with money to invest in businesses and research and development, coming up with new ideas rather than buying a villa from 1908 and selling it for 2.7 billion because the neighborhood's changed.
Billion, I like the billion.
It's fucked. And I think this is just a backdoor to going, Kianga Ora can't do it. And the government shouldn't be doing it. So this is what we were talking about overseas partnerships. Here's the backdoor to overseas investors owning property in New Zealand. That's where I see this going.
Yep.
What else have we got here? J-Mac here says, Kianga Ora just built an amazing street of homes here in Gizzy. Some of the tenants have been living in their cars and motels for a couple of years waiting for social housing. The street looks amazing. Yeah, like from what I've seen of these developments, like the NIMBY crowd, they might get all up in arms because one or two sections now have 24 dwellings on it. But we have a housing crisis. And like I said, we don't need quarter-acre sections and four-bedroom homes. We need 1- and 2-bedroom homes. We need people to a place to start their lives.
Yep.
And they need to be close to services, and they need to be close to schools. And that's what it comes down to. We as a country should not have people living in tents next to a fucking motorway.
Yeah. Yeah. No, when you say that someone passed away as well, that's the truth, isn't it? Jackson Media on the super chat, maybe buying secondhand crawlers for houses. The answer for everything. Cookie Nick is Karen is my guy. Up yours, Buddy Rick. Do you understand that? Is that a joke? Is that a well-known joke? I don't understand the joke. Jackson Media also says, and also rumor has it that David Seymour is working worse human in recent history.
Slight tangent. Did you see him on the working group?
Last week, yeah, we played it, didn't we?
Yeah, Bomber's cut up a couple of shorts from that interview, and I've never wanted to punch my own screen so much in all of my life.
Seymour, word is he couldn't even pass a Turing test, says Citizen Gold. Thank God, appreciate your thoughts. And Gareth just probably thinks what a lot of people think who are watching, even you righties, is it too early to vote for Kieran in 2026? Well, you know what you could be looking at? You probably, I think, he won't be watching now, you're looking at Labor's next leader there. So you're probably looking at the person who's vying to be the Prime Minister at the next election, would be my guess, Chewie. Just a guess, though. I don't know. I don't have any inside knowledge. Let's keep trucking, are we? Because yeah, we'll maybe we'll do one of the two small stories now, and then we'll do Chloe. And if we've got time, we'll do the second small story. And if we're not, we'll just pass it off till tomorrow night. So there is a former Shortland Street actor. His name is Will Alexander. He has come out in the last 24 hours saying he is going to go on a hunger strike. I think we'll play this from his Facebook page because this gives more detail as to what and why. And I have to say, if you're watching from the start of the show and you heard me say I have reservations, I have no reservations around why he wants to make a statement. But when we get to the end of this little clip, I'll tell you why I have reservations. This is Will Alexander from this weekend at a protest in Christchurch, I think.
We're standing here today at the Bridge of Remembrance. And I remember my grandfather who risked his life to stop the rise of fascism in Europe during the Second World War. He risked his life to stop genocide. So what was the point of all of that if I'm just going to sit here watching it happen again on my phone while the New Zealand government supports this genocide?
I mean, to point, Joey, no critiques, eh? I mean, like, on board with you, understand. That's what I'm saying. No, there's no criticism of the cause and what he's saying at all. Keep going.
I have to do something about this. And so today at 1 o'clock, I've started my hunger strike. I will not eat anything until the New Zealand government stops bombing Yemen and withdraws our troops from the Red Sea. I will not eat anything until the New Zealand government stops Raycon, a company in New Zealand, from manufacturing bomb parts that are used in Israel's genocide. And I will not eat anything until the New Zealand government resumes and then doubles its humanitarian aid funding for UNRWA. And if the government doesn't do these things, then I might soon be dead, like these people. But there is hope. There is hope in people like who risked her life to climb onto the roof of the Christchurch City Council building with a Palestinian flag to protest the New Zealand government's complicity in this genocide. There is hope in people like John Minto, who attended an anti-apartheid conference recently. And there is hope in your anger that fuels these peaceful protests. The people are rising up and our governments work for us. Hands off Rafah! Hands off Rafah! Hands off Rafah! Hands off Rafah!
I think in his other, and it's a very powerful protest, like in the setting, there's fake, but bodies on the ground, etc. So for those people who are listening to the audio podcast, here's a clip up right now. This is my 3 demands: withdraw New Zealand troops from the Red Sea, stop Raycon manufacturing weapons components used in Israel's genocide, and resume and then double humanitarian aid funding for UNRWA. Now, you're not going to get anything from me about the cause. Nothing negative. I mean, it's on board, 100% with you, 100%. This is the reservation. The government's not going to do what you're demanding. And because the government's not going to do what you're demanding, you are either going to die, which I think is unlikely, or you're going to withdraw your hunger strike, and then that will actually feed the opposition to supporting Gaza and give them fodder to lob over in this area. That's my reservation, Chewie.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to criticize, though, isn't it?
Well, not the cause. Absolutely not. I just think, though, that's what I think. I think the most likely scenario, we'll put it this way. Do you agree, Chewie, that the government will not relinquish to his demands?
No, I can't see how they can clear all 3 of those things.
Yeah. So in other words, that's not going to happen. So therefore, he's either going to die, which I think is unlikely, or he's going to withdraw his hunger strike and give fodder to the opposition to basically minimize the cause he's trying to further. We support the cause, but this being withdrawn, what we're going to do could give people the opportunity to minimize the cause. That's my reservation.
Like I can see the top one. Pull New Zealand troops out of the Red Sea. I could see the government doing that. Resuming aid to UNRWA. I think Winston has more or less indicated that our donations to our turn for donations to them is, I think, the end of June.
Yeah.
Doubling them?
They won't double them.
Can't see them doubling it.
No.
And I don't know enough about that Raycon company or what the government can compel them to do. But yes, you're exactly right. If you're not sure that you can apply that much pressure, then yes, you're in a position of backing down and giving up. I mean, I don't know if this is a great comparison because different protests, different country. Look, in the States, someone set themselves on fire and died to make a statement, and that is essentially being brushed aside in the States. Like it barely moved the needle, which is fucking crazy to me.
I want to make it clear as well, so people don't get it twisted from what I said. I've said I have reservations, not I don't support. Firstly, I haven't seen anyone even say that in the chat, but I just want to make that really clear. And the reservation is that I don't think in this country someone going on a hunger strike could even actually starve themselves to death, because I think at the worst point they'd be unconscious in a hospital with a feeding tube, right? And so the only realistic situation is the person backs down and has to say, for these reasons, I'm now withdrawing which he's entitled to do. But like I said, I just don't like the giving that opposing view any fodder, and that's what my reservation is over. I'm also happy to sit here and go, yes, I had reservations, but he was 100% correct. I'm completely prepared to do that in 6 weeks from now, right? And I was wrong and he was right 100%. But yeah, I've said it 3 times. I can't be much clearer about why. And I just wonder, and I hope that this does some way towards the cause that he is fighting for, that we're all actually fighting for on most levels, all of us that are watching this at least pretty much. And I have reservations. I've reservations as to what will be the end outcome from this particular protest, as opposed to the end outcome from the protest in general.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking of other demands, essentially.
Yep.
What about a single demand that we immediately increase our refugee intake of, even say, orphans from the area that have family here in New Zealand? I was reading a story about that earlier this afternoon. Demanding that the Israeli ambassadorial team get turfed out on their area.
Let me say this as well, though, and this is not said from someone who sits on the fence, right? I don't. But Chewy, what you're currently doing, speaking with people about what's going on in Dunedin with the homeless, is more likely to get an outcome than you sitting in the Octagon saying you're on a hunger strike till you die, unless they put those, the homeless people into that building right now. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to criticize him. He's got a way of doing it, but I just think as well, I do this a lot when I'm working with businesses, and I do this a lot when I'm talking to my kids, not to be patronizing, but what's the outcome you want to see? If the outcome is X, then what we now need to do is plan how to get to X. Like, what's the steps we need to take to get to X? And I guess my reservations, though, I believe the steps he is taking will not get to X no matter what. So the steps will either fall over or he'll be incredibly seriously sick. I guess that's the choice he's made.
You know what I think this is an indication of, right? We have had a constant series of rallies throughout a lot of cities in New Zealand. The one in Dunedin has gone on every single Saturday since
the weekend
this started.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people, and it's been very vocal, and there's been a lot of suggestions of what we should do, and nothing has changed. And we've seen bigger, more strident protests overseas, in Israel, in the US, in most of the European capitals, and nothing has changed. The genocide has gone on. The weapons packages have continued to be developed and delivered, and nothing has changed. And it's more dead children, and it's more aid shipments that are getting kicked over by Israelis that don't want to let it in. And you've got the IDF telling people in the south to evacuate north and people in the north to evacuate south, and the bombings continue and nothing changes. And there has to be a point where someone that is passionate about the movement goes, well, I have to try something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe in this enough that I have to do something else, anything else, to try and move that needle. And I 100% believe that this is where this fella's coming from.
Yeah. That's why I don't want to make it clear. I'm not criticizing him.
Yeah,
and I guess one of my weaknesses is also a strength, is I'll put on my marketing hat a little bit. It sounds a little bit clinical and horrible, and go, how do we sell product X, which is peace in the Middle East? How do we sell that? How do we make that a product that people want to take on board? Maybe what he's basically doing is, well, we've tried every sort of ribbon and every colorful wrapping to try and sell this product. So now I'm going to physically beat my head against the wall until someone starts listening. And maybe it'll work. Maybe like I said, in 6 weeks, I'll say I had reservations. I was wrong. More than happy for that to be me.
I would say that if you're doing something like that, you have to, it's visibility, it's media, it's sitting on the steps of Parliament and doing it.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. In the chat, Gordon's mentioned an excellent point. Happened in Auckland during the Vietnam War. Dr. Taylor in Albert Park. The government did change and the troops did come back. He lost a lot of weight and he kept the war in the headline for a long time. That's what you have to do. So whether this guy has a plan of how to keep this in the media notice, whether he has a reporter that's going to try and push the message for him and give him access to those eyeballs, that will matter.
Yeah,
I wish him all the best. I hope he can move the needle.
I was just looking for the latest protest photo. I saw a protest photo from Dunedin on Saturday, I think on Twitter, and the numbers, it was just still huge. It's a huge number of people. Huge number.
The numbers are really consistent, and it doesn't depend on what's on in town, and it doesn't depend on the weather.
Yeah.
It is consistent. A friend of mine was actually asked to speak at one of them, and he's like, I don't speak in front of people, and I wrote my first speech, and he goes, I think 15 pages is too long, and I'm like, yes, dude. Yes, it is.
Maybe so.
But it's one of those things. Like I have it here. Like it is so monstrous, and you feel so powerless that it's either 15 pages of why it's so horrible and why it needs to stop, and here are all these justifications, and here's the history of what's going on, and rah rah rah, or it's just grab the mic and scream.
Yeah,
because words are hard, and they don't. Sometimes it's just a scream. I look at those Palestinian families that have watched their extended family, and sometimes their very close family, dwindle, and just they can't contact them. They have no idea it's monstrous. It's absolutely monstrous in a way that nobody in this country really has a concept of. Like, imagine a New Zealand city just disappearing, bit by bit, just dropping off social networks that never answer their phone again. Just crazy. And then of course the Palestinian experience is that most of them are children.
Just
mad.
All right, I can't find the photos, so you'll just have to believe me that the numbers were pretty massive. Okay, yeah, look, good luck to the man, and I hope the intention works into actions, which works into a result that benefit the exact cause that we
should
are
try and
all
get him on
behind.
at some point.
I'd sent him a message today and haven't heard back from him. So, all right, let's move on because you know what happens at 10 o'clock. It's time to get the Queen on. The Queen likes to come out late. She does too. The Queen comes out late. She comes out at 10. The old Queen. Chloe Swarbrick on Q&A over the weekend. It was a mixed bag for Chloe. I wanted to show you this first question because it's a question based around a little bit of controversy about a methane target. At the moment, it's a band to get methane down to, and getting it to a specific target is a little bit controversial. And it's a bit of a tough question for some politicians to answer. And I wanted to show you the first question, which is what I said earlier about Chloe has an answer for most things. And so he asks her, this is Jack asked her about supporting the establishment of a single methane target. And straight away she answers it. She basically says, and I'm going to play it, you know, in theory, yes. And that's it. Simple as that. Answers the question. And then they go on to talking about reforming the ETS. Let's have a look at Chloe Swarbrick this weekend on Q&A.
You said before that the Zero Carbon Act had bipartisan support. It did, although to be fair, National never supported that methane target. They've been explicit about that. I want to know from you, do you, in principle, support the establishment of a single methane target? That's
the perfect kind of question, in principle, that a politician won't answer, right? Do you in principle? No, you know, I don't do hypotheticals. Yeah, you know, so, and her answer is...
You, in principle, support the establishment of a single methane target?
In principle.
Yeah. How would you reform the ETS?
Well, I have a members' bill to do precisely this. And actually, this has some roots in some of the work that I did on the Environment Select Committee during the 2017 to 2020 term, when we passed the Zero Carbon Act and also some changes to free allocations within the emissions trading scheme. So effectively, one of the first next logical steps that we can make in progressing bipartisan accord to improve the integrity of the emissions trading scheme is to enable the Climate Change Commission to be able to set the number of units that are available within the ETS.
So this is where Chloe's at her strongest. Facts she knows, research she understands, delivering it in a way, 60 seconds, that is just crystal clear. It's where she's at her best.
So this is something which I think, again, if we are to look at some of the decisions that were made against the advice or the requests of the Honourable James Shaw to the former cabinet, which resulted in the failure of a number of auctions, we need to improve the integrity of that scheme, especially given that the new government has put so many of their eggs in that basket to get our climate emissions down.
It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, look,
I mean, it's a members' bill, so are you going to get a support of a majority of the House if it comes out of the tin?
I will be working constructively across the aisle, and I'd make the point on this that I actually had the first ever Green Party members' bill that we're aware of, which passed through every single stage with full consensus of the House in the form of my Election Access Fund Act, which established a fund available for candidates with disabilities to remove barriers. That
totally different to the emissions trading scheme, though.
Yeah, but again, I would say that this is an issue in terms of the climate crisis, which is here now and which is bigger than partisan politics.
Adaptation. Climate Minister Simon Watt says he's committed to continuing cross-party work on climate adaptation. So what's that going to mean?
So we'll let this continue on because it's got another 30 seconds. It's the next part of the conversation about adaptation. The thing about adaptation for people to understand is the reason that National pleads, yeah, great, adaptation, we'll adapt. What they're basically doing is we're not going to try and solve the problem. You know, we're going to adapt to the problem. We are not going to try and solve any climate issues. And so the right will say, yes, we're on board. Yes, climate change. Yes, this, yes, that. We need to adapt. And then they'll stop. Whereas the truth is we sort of need to reduce and adapt at the same time. And that's sort of what they're talking about now. This has got 30 seconds. We'll just play this and then we can have a chat.
So there is a climate adaptation inquiry which was announced in the last few weeks, which will be going to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. I've been engaged across the aisle working with the Honourable Simon Watson and have commended him on the fact that he's continued in the footsteps of James Shaw to that effect. But look, we have to go a lot further. We can't just be talking about adaptation here because we also need to be talking about mitigation. If we are not stopping the source of the fire, then all of the fire extinguishers in the world mean nothing.
I mean, perfect analogy, Joey. Biggest fires in the world, if you've got no way of stopping them, those fire extinguishers aren't going to work. So adaptation, yes, along with mitigation or at least reduction in that area. Any thoughts, sir?
Every time I hear a government talking about climate adaptation, it is a right-wing government. Read into that what you will. They don't want to change how we do things. They want us to change how we live. So, yeah, more petrol, more gas, more fossil fuels. There's nothing we can do about it. Big shrug emoji. We don't want to affect people's bottom lines. We don't want to encourage new industries.
Yeah.
I saw a comment go past that, like, just when you compare Chloe statements and how she talks to Luxon, it's like, what's the comparison? A man getting kicked in the head by a horse? Just so clear, so across things, so aware of the context, and the exact opposite of what I was talking earlier of just being very surface level, never considering the flow-on effects or the other things that might contribute to whether what you're doing works or not.
Although, in saying that, we play each ball on its merits here. In this interview, which I'll show you in a wee while, she's not so skillful when it comes to interpersonal conversations. Like, I think Chloe seems unbelievably skilled when it comes to data and facts and research and evidence. We're going to get to a part of this conversation which is much more uncomfortable for the Greens, which is talking about their personnel and the troubles they're having so far. And, you know, in that conversation, I think there's room for improvement when it comes to communicating clearly, because politicians in general speak in a certain way. And I'm not saying it's anything like what I would say to you is, and not answering questions, but you can see when a politician is off their primary focus, it's harder to be as clear and as concise, which I'll show you because it happened. But before we do that, this is a very quick 30-second clip about activism versus pragmatism. Is she an activist or is she pragmatic? Which I think is a fascinating thought.
Organising.
Is activism a good way to get climate policy passed?
Well, Jack, we had this discussion a few months ago when I first put my hat into the ring for the co-leadership. Activism is a very legitimate means to go about drumming up public awareness on an issue so that we can put politicians' feet to the fire and change things. And this is a really cool point that I'll be making in the State of the Planet speech today. No positive progress is guaranteed. And that means that communities need to mobilise and not leave politics to the politicians such that we get the outcomes that all of us deserve.
Okay.
Now, there may be an element of that conversation, Tori, which we could refer to our last conversation about, you know, pragmatism versus activism. But I agree. And in this interview as well, she does talk about, you know, following James Shaw's example of being able to reach across the aisle, which is more pragmatic. So maybe Chloe is saying you can use your activism as well on one hand and pragmatism when needed. That's sort of the vibe of the interview that I listened to.
Yeah. And I think this is, since Chloe stood up for the leadership, this has been a consistent message from her, is don't leave politics up to the politicians. And it's one thing that I 100% agree with.
Yeah.
Like, if people are agitating publicly for this sort of stuff, and then somebody in Parliament is trying to build consensus across the aisle and say, look, people want this, and then can point at a movement and go, see, look, these people vote. And I think it's also coherent that she's saying these things, especially when you saw James Shaw's interviews with Jack the other week, is that he was very clear that if the climate goals that the Greens have and the existential threat that climate change is to this country is as bad as it is, then they need to be building that cross-aisle consensus that the environment is important. It is not just a left issue.
Yep. And it can't just be a left issue if they want things to pass. I mean, that's the reality with pragmatism as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, now this is the next part of the conversation. There's a couple of bits here. I've left a bit in about Efeso Collins because Jack asks about how is the party doing, and some quite, you know, you can see there's not quite it's not, no one, you know, breaks out in tears, but you can see that there's still a sense, obviously a sensitive side there for what the Greens are still going through with the loss of Efeso. And then we go into a conversation around Darlene Taha. Is it Taha? Have I spelled that right? And also Julianne Genter after this. So we'll play this through, and there are some moments here we'll stop and pause, and because we do commentate on the commentators, I'm going to reflect on Shu, and I want your thoughts as well as to where the messaging possibly would have been better for the answers. Let's have a listen.
I want to talk about the party. It's been a rough year. let's start with the Fessel. How is the caucus doing after a Fessel's death?
I'll be honest with you in that, nothing could repair you for just how devastating it is to lose a colleague. I mean, I was sat with Fess in the chamber the night before he came home to Tamaki Makaurau and passed away. And myself and Debbie Ngāti Wapaka, were engaged in a little bit of back and forth with the government. And Fess was just sitting there in his gentle, giant way. An incredible loss.
Yeah. Has it had a kind of continuing impact on the caucus? I know it's a relatively inexperienced caucus.
Look, the nature of grief obviously looks different to different people, but the reality is that we're probably still going to be grappling with the impacts of that on all of us personally for a while to come.
Yeah, there have been some other incidents.
Yeah.
Quote, aggressive in the sense of being hostile, unprofessional, with an element that was objectively threatening, but not in the sense of physical violence. Do you know who that describes?
You tell me, Jack.
Come on.
I am assuming that you are talking about the behaviour of Julianne Genter, which she obviously immediately apologised for.
I'm not, which is the point.
Okay.
That was a description of Tim van der Molen. Okay. He was held in contempt of...
Anyone says Jack Tame gives it up to the left, he just walked her into that trap. He just walked her into it.
I heard the trap snap shut.
Yeah.
Damn.
Now, where the messaging is lost, remember, we're just a couple of buffheads from Dunedin. No one needs to listen to us. But where the messaging is lost from this is Chloe is relying too much on she apologized straight away. She doesn't hand wave away the accusations or the serious nature, but she relies too much on, but she apologized straight away. It's a bit like when National wants to talk about numbers and not the numbers of reduction of, public servants rather than the service they provide. Relying on but she apologized straight away. She moves away from the actions a little bit, even though she says, I'm not moving away from the actions. It kind of does, but we'll play through it and then we'll get your thoughts, Joey.
Of Parliament censured last year after he was accused of threatening a Labour MP in Select Committee. Christopher Luxon stripped him of his portfolios after that. Do you think that was an appropriate response from a party leader at the time?
I got to say, these are two completely different circumstances. Tim van der Molen, from my understanding of the situation, denied that what occurred.
Well, yeah, they're different in numerous cases. And I'll even say this again that I said last week, which some people criticised me for online. A female standing over a male is different from a male standing over a female because to be in fear or to be intimidated or someone to be intimidating, you need to be intimidated. A 65 kilo, 5'5" woman standing over a 6'3", 110 kilo man is not intimidating. Now that doesn't.
About this, we can't make that.
No, that doesn't. No, listen, that's why I say there's not. No. That's what I'm saying. In the house, it makes no difference. But one of the standards we judge it by is in society it does. In the house, there is no difference with behaviour between male, female. No difference. So you didn't even quite finish that, Joey. In society, we judge it by objective reality. And the objective reality of a woman standing over a man yelling is very different from a man standing over a woman yelling. In general, yes, a 6'4" shot put woman standing over a 5'2", 90 or 60 kilo man is different again. But in my generalizations, Joey. Now, sorry, you were going to correct me on something. Feel free, sir.
I thought I did. I have nothing more to add.
No, but I agree with you. It's no different in the house. In a workplace, if a man says something sexist, it should be treated no harshly or better than if a woman says something sexist. In society, there are different. We put different rules on it. I'm sorry if the reality doesn't sit well with your determination to find hypocrisy tonight, but that is the reality. Man punching a woman is different in society than woman punching a man. It just is. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. It just is. That's the reality we live in.
And obviously went through a privilege.
Sorry, Joey, you go.
But my one concern with the line that you're going down is it brushes away potentially in general the fact or trying to paint the picture that a man can never be threatened by a woman.
No, it doesn't, because I just said,
It's my concern whenever we start talking about this. I'm just making it very clear.
No, that's fine.
Right.
And look, I think with my example of a larger, stronger female over a male,
doesn't have to be physical size.
Sure.
Honestly,
and
it doesn't.
I don't disagree with you, Chewy, but I'm saying, as a generalization, which is probably silly of me, if you lined up 100 men and 100 women, and we're only talking about physical violence here, because that's what we're talking about, the intimidationary thing, that in general, mostly men are going to be more intimidating to the women than the women are to the men. I think it's a fair generalization amongst society.
I think without going down analogy, when we're talking about these two different examples, Julianne Genter crossing the floor and standing by that male MP and going, "Have you read the brief? Have you read the document?" While he smirked, he wasn't threatened. The behavior was well out of order.
Of course.
With the one that they're talking about where the guy was stripped of his portfolios and that sort of thing, where he was directly standing over top of the other MP and blocking a door and demanding that he stand up, as you would to a person in a pub, stand up so I can knock you down.
Yep.
To the point where parliamentary staffers were calling for security. I see her point here. Jack's trying to draw a line between these two things, and they're not the same, and no two circumstances should be. Yep, she can go, cool, she apologized altogether. I think she needs to push back here on the comparison between the two events. They are completely different. Julianne Genter's failing here is not keeping her emotions in check and behaving out of order in the house. It's not a question of going, was that a threatening move and this national MP was going to get thumped in the air? That wasn't it.
But that's what they're selling it as. They're selling it as no difference.
That's what I mean. She needs to push back against that. Yeah. They're not the same.
Well, look, what I'll say again is that behavior should be treated maybe on a different scale, but the same in the house. But like, as in, if you've broken the rules of the house, then you've broken the rules of the house, whether you're male or female. But in general, there are different, like, that's why in parts of the world they have, like, assault 1, assault 2, assault 3, or murder 1, murder 2, murder 3. These things all happen on different levels. And it's not just because we're defending, the side of politics we're on. I'm just giving you reality within society. In general, not all the time.
We're not talking about society in general. We're talking about actions in the house.
Well, but I think that there's an element that we are actually looking at this and judging it from in society as well, which is why I say there's angles to look at this. I think that we're looking at it from outside the house as people, as citizens, as voters, as people who consume the media, and we are also judging it from what happens in society. I think that's a part of the conversation people go through, rather than just we won't debate, we won't talk about how this would be in the real world, only in the house.
I guess my pushback on this is, as a reasonably solid sort of dude, I have been threatened by women smaller than I in the job situation and that sort of thing, and it's different, but it doesn't make it any less threatening. Sure. Do I look at the footage of what Julianne Genter did? I do not see a man that feels like he's under threat. Well,
that's the other way I was saying. Yeah. To be intimidated, one needs to be intimidating. Like, did he feel intimidated? Probably not. Does that therefore mean her actions were not intimidating? Because that's what they're accusing her of, being intimidating.
I think it's well out of order. Yeah, but
100%. Yeah. We're not going to argue that it was out of order, it was incorrect. Sanctions are probably appropriate. Maybe something through the greens, maybe, being sat down for a little while, all appropriate. But this has also turned into a societal narrative that the right are pushing, Chewy. So I think to just say, outside of the house, it doesn't mean, we're not looking at that. That's what part of their narrative is.
So I think these two things, the two different events, what's actually happening there is they're lessening what their dude did and making Julianne Genter's brain fart more heightened. Yeah, they're not the same. They're not even close to the same level, and it's not to do with the gender.
Yeah. So what they're saying is
not the same.
They're either saying our guys was only as flippant as your girls, or they're saying your girls was as serious as our guys. whichever
Correct.
one of those you want. All right, we'll keep going.
This process, Julianne immediately apologised and acknowledged her actions were completely unacceptable, and we've reinforced that from the get-go.
If Julianne Genter is held in contempt of Parliament, will you stand her down from her portfolio?
I guess we have to ask the question.
This is again not a particularly good response. The response here should be all options are on the table. We'll see what comes of the investigation. All options are on the table. But this is the one part of this conversation where Chloe does play a little of the political game, goes, well, we can't answer the hypotheticals. But the correct answer here would be something like, if that does happen, all options are on the table. End of conversation.
Held in contempt of Parliament, will you stand her down from her portfolio?
I guess we have to ask the question of what is the point that we're trying to get to here. Julianne is an incredibly knowledgeable and hard-working member of Parliament who has made massive contributions in the transport space, but none of that is to make any excuses for the behaviour which happened that Wednesday night in Parliament. So, look, if more things do end up being necessary as we work through this process, then we will work through
I
that.
mean,
But
we've
said
seen the behaviour. I mean, from what you've seen of the behaviour, I mean, it was a remarkable thing to witness in the House. Do you think that is worthy of stripping your MP of her portfolio?
Again, I think that they're completely incomparable situations. If you're
They're
talking
not
about
really
the one
incomparable. I just read you a description and you thought it was Julianne Genter.
Jack,
Again, I was talking to the fact.
But what I'm saying is that idea of saying all options are on the table is a way of saying that could be a possible outcome. What you're asking me, yes, it could possibly, but equally it may not be. It's quite a good way to be able to say, I'm not going to filibust here. I'm not going to say this is hypothetical. It's actually saying maybe we'll have to wait and see. Quite clearly, all options, Jack, will be on the table at the end of the investigation. That conversation is then finished, Chewy. Because what comeback can you have that? It's like, maybe you're right. Maybe that will happen. Maybe it won't. All options are on the table.
Yeah,
Done.
Take the heat out of the question. Yes.
Yeah,
Cool.
totally.
Moving on.
Totally.
Rather than
You
putting
are
back,
talking
no,
about
absolutely
media
not.
descriptions.
But,
Of
I mean,
different
no,
politicians
they are actually, about as comparable as two events can be. I mean, we can maybe quibble over the time with which they took to accept fault and apologize.
Yeah, no, but see, that's not a quibble, Jack. That's quite a serious part of the nature. When you start off by defending yourself, and then what becomes as expedient to apologizing is actually very different from apologizing straight away and recognizing straight away. It's very, so it does actually, it's not a quibble, it's actually a serious part of the actual conversation.
I mean, we can maybe quibble over the time with which they took to accept fault and apologise, but I mean, that they are so comparable that you yourself thought that I was describing your own MP.
If I can bring you back to the core point, Julianne made a mistake. She messed up. She owned up to that.
And there should be consequences for those mistakes.
And there have been, Jack, through the likes of the public kind of, chastising that has occurred over the past few weeks.
That's a really good point.
Well, do you think that's a good point though? Because what they're saying is, should there be consequences politically for someone who's done this? And the answer is, have you seen the nasty tweets there's been? It's like, on some level, it's also, I think Chloe's saying, without saying all outcomes are on the table, it's also saying we don't have to correct her, the public's doing that. I don't know if I'm quite sold that that's such a good messaging, Chewy.
I don't know. If Julianne was completely unrepentant about what she did,
yep,
absolutely, strip her of the portfolio.
Yep.
But the instant adjustment, the instant owning of it in the media, I think when you look at the political landscape, and remember, there's been studies into this, that how toxic the debate around our MPs, and especially our female MPs, has got, that I think this is a really valid point, is that there is a punishment that is instantly paid by a female in the Green Party for having a human reaction. There's comments in our chat tonight about how Chloe is too emotional, and I think that this is a comment that needs to come forward more. We lost Kiri Tapualan, we've lost Golriz, we've lost several other MPs through an absolute hounding from an unhinged public. So I think when she's mentioning this as far as a price to be paid for her poor decision and her actions, yeah, I agree with her. This is part of it.
Side note here, and can I just say at the moment, the chat is with you, Chewy, so great. Do you think the reason Golriz actually resigned was because of how the public treated her, or do you think, in all honesty, someone can get accused of shoplifting as I don't think anything's been proven yet and remain as an MP?
No. She went. What I'm talking about is in Golriz's case, you have a very high profile female Green MP.
Yep.
That has been instantly disliked by the hard right of the politically motivated public.
Of course.
Who is dealing with what is it? She's got MS, dealing with a long-term debilitating illness. And to have that constant pressure of her job and the comments around her and everything that she does and everything that she is.
Yep.
I think that had a mental toll. And when you break like that, who knows what you're going to do? And it could be drinking too much and deciding to drive. It could be shoplifting from boutiques. That sort of thing. I'm just like, this is what happens. And if you grind out all the humours, the people that are passionate about the things that they take into Parliament, and you hold them to the standard where they can't have emotions, they can't be passionate, and we let people comment on them in such vicious, like the stuff around Golriz is evil.
Yeah, I agree.
There are
Obviously,
some people in the social media comments that are evil with how they talk about her. They broke a person and they took glee in it, and they still are. And so this is why I'm glad that Chloe's mentioned it, is look, there is a cost to what she did. It's not necessarily Green Party process. And maybe we don't add to it.
I mean, like, this is now turning into a conversation that's far, far bigger than we can handle in the next negative 2 minutes before the show runs out. But it's a bit of little chicken or the egg. Was she broken and did the things? You know, was Kitty Tupper Allen broken and she did the things, or she did the things because she was broken? You know, what did people break them, and was the thing an outworking, or was the thing an outworking and it caused them to be broken? You know, like, which way does it go? Because what you're also saying, I hear you saying, is when I say if you've shoplifted and, you know, in these serious, or if you've run from the police, you know, can you stay an MP? I mean, I think most people would say no, it's pretty hard to stay an MP there, but what's the cause of running from the police? What's the cause of the shoplifting? And if that came directly from your job, you know, like what you're talking about, then there's a much bigger question to be answered. And I think the one thing you talked about was about being emotional. Like, maybe the difference is Julianne Jensen's not going anywhere. She had an emotional outburst, but she's not going anywhere. And that's probably because there was no, and I'll say alleged because I don't know where they're at, but alleged criminal activity involved with her emotional response at the time, which I think, again, we all agree with the emotional response. It's just the standard of what you're supposed to do at your place of work. And that's maybe the difference. And I'm not saying, therefore, she's fine and the other two aren't, but that's probably the line for staying in your job. I mean, we all know people, you probably know people that got convicted of drink driving. I know a guy in radio got convicted of drink driving, so he lost his radio job. He could still do his job, but there was a line that was crossed that he could no longer do his job because...
Hey, look, if you want to talk about radio, you can throw your partner down the stairs, break her back, and come back in a couple of years. It's fine.
It was very bad for the station when they did that. Hey, and because I was there at the time. This has got about 90 seconds to go. Let's just play it through because we'll see what else she's got to say. Because at the moment she's talking about Julianne Genter. She goes on to talk about Darlene Tanner as well, but I've cut most of that out and I'll reference it at the end and tell you why.
She owned up to it and she has made amends. Yeah. We are getting her personal and professional support. She is operating within the realm of the privileges complaint, and we will work through that process.
So,
and we're getting on with the work, which I think is the most important thing.
Will you consider standing her down if she's held in contempt?
Again, I don't really get the point that we're trying to get to here. Julianne made amends almost immediately. She acknowledged that she had done wrong. We are working through the Privileges Committee process.
So let me say one more thing. I actually think what she's saying is fine, but I also know how the media works. The media will spin this as she won't answer the question. That's probably a part of like, again, you know, all options are on the table once the investigation is finished. Done. Will you stand it down? All options are on the table once the investigation is finished. I can't tell you now because the investigation is going on. So I actually kind of agree with you. Maybe I'm being a bit what's the word when you try and find an argument that's not there? I know what she's saying. I get it. I think what she's saying is fine, but I also understand how that will be read and how that will be respun by dishonest actors. And I think that there becomes a problem for the message of this political party and this person. Is that a better way of saying it?
Yeah, and look, it's something like it's a double-edged sword when it comes to Chloe. Her answers are good. They're expansive. When Jack's looking for a soundbite,
yeah,
and he'll push until he gets it.
Yep.
And when you're used to giving expansive, fulsome answers,
yeah,
maybe that soundbite's going to get clipped into something that you didn't intend.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. Yes, there should be a short version of this that is just basically like, here's the long version, Jack. Okay, well, I'm going to ask the question again.
Yeah.
Right. All options are on the table once it's cleared the process that I've just discussed.
I've seen people in interviews go, asked and answered, next please. I know that's too aggressive to say it like that, but that's basically what you're saying. And
the media love taking a head, like taking a scalp. Like we were part of getting rid of that person. You know, it's almost like a badge of honor. And I just don't like, and sometimes they go for it when there just isn't the call for it. Like this is a flash in the pan. Julianne had a fucking brain fart and instantly realized.
Yeah.
Like this conversation should be over. There is no comparison.
Yeah. We'll get to the end of this bit about Julianne Gent, and then I'll just tell you what they said about Darlene Tanner as well.
Outcomes of that are she's getting personal and professional support. And the other point needs to be made here, Jack, that she has made immense contributions within the transport portfolio.
But it's about leadership, isn't it? And what does it say about the Green Party's attitude to bullying and to professional standards that Christopher Luxon would appear to be holding his MPs to a higher standard than yours?
His MPs completely denied what had occurred, which ended up being
he accepted it once they went through the Privileges Committee process. Tim Van der Molen apologised.
Again, Julianne Gent.
Yeah, that's an important part. Once they went through the privilege, how long was that? How many weeks or months was that? Once they went all the way through.
Apologised immediately for what had occurred.
And so that's enough for her to hold the portfolios.
What is the point that we're trying to get to here around the
well, it's about the standards in public life that we expect from
representatives. And the standards are that Marama and I have been completely explicit consistently about the fact that we make absolutely no excuses for and completely apologise for that behaviour. It has no place in our parliament from any member of parliament, from any political party, least of all in our own.
There you go. Yeah, that was it. See, at the end, and you know what happened after that is they moved on to the next question. So maybe, just needed to get that one out. I'll play this last one, then we can chat. This last one's around Darlene Tanner as well. Basically, Jack spent a couple of minutes saying, or 90 seconds saying, why are you still paying her? Why is she still being paid a full salary? And all I could think when I was sitting there watching it was, that's probably actually an employment law. Like there's probably a legality that you can't just go, oh, by the way, we're investigating this alleged incident now and you're not earning any income. So I didn't really want to play the 90 seconds of that because I think that's probably, if any person out there working in a job, if the workplace stood them down while they're investigating an incident, they probably just can't go, by the way, you've got no income for the next 4 weeks. So I kind of find that to be a bit pointless. But what was interesting was Jack reads out a statement that Marama said about we have found out some more information that we didn't know, and then challenges Chloe on what is the new information? Like, what is it all about? Because if there is more that we don't know, why are we still treating it like we don't know the answers? That's probably a bad paraphrase, but let's just have a quick listen. It's only, we're only looking at like 60 seconds.
Quote, it came to our attention that Ms. Tanner may have had some prior knowledge of the allegations. That's from Marama Davidson on the 14th of March. You say there's a natural justice process that applies. I think people would agree with that in principle. But that sounds like your co-leader publicly acknowledging that Darlene Tanner misled your party.
That is, that statement that you've just read out there from Marama is the statement that we provided to the media off the back of why we started this
did she mislead your party?
The point of the investigation is to get to the bottom of it.
But I mean, that's what that statement
The point
implies.
of the investigation is to figure out what Darlene Tanner knew and when.
It came to our attention that Ms. Tana may have had some prior knowledge of the allegations. If that's the case, there will be many people saying, why are we continuing to pay her throughout this? Sure, give her the natural justice thing. Don't kick her out of the party necessarily until you have a result of this investigation. But at the very least, if she knew about some of these allegations and she hadn't revealed them to the party, she shouldn't be taking a salary.
That's the point of the investigation, Jack, and that's the point of the natural justice process that we're following.
There you go. That's the end of that conversation as well. Much more succinct with that one, but it was an interesting perspective, even from Jack, to go, if you guys are saying there's more that we didn't know about, that she may have had some knowledge of these actions, that seems to be an interesting part of this conversation. That's it for Chloe on the show. That's anything you want to add to from those 2 or 3 topics?
Yeah, like when they talk about this other issue, somebody being stood down on full pay and that sort of thing because there's an independent investigation going on, that's unquestionable. Like you can't stand someone down like from an employment. I know being an MP is not the same as a standard employment type thing. Yeah. But if someone is being investigated for wrongdoing, you can't take their pay away while you do it.
100%.
There might be a question around the speed of the investigation, but this is why it's not an internal green investigation. They have done exactly what they should do. They've employed a barrister to investigate it. And then once they have all the facts, then they can react.
Yeah.
And I have personally no doubt that if this person is found to have done the things that she's been accused of, she's gone. She's absolute gone burger.
Yeah, because that would then cross that line of potential, I don't know whether it'll be criminal, we don't know yet, but of potentially laws being broken, whatever the actual thing would be. And that seems to be for politicians. I mean, you think about, I know Sam Uffindell's thing was when he was a teenager, but the Moldavian, whatever his name was, none of that seemed to, well, Uffindell potentially was, but was never convicted of a crime, was that seems to be the line for politicians. They can all fuck up, they can all get help, they can all get better, like all of us can. But if you cross that line of, I guess the worst embarrassment ever, but it seems that if you cross that line of potential, because I'm saying potential because it needs to be proven in a court of law, criminal activity, that's the gone burger moment for anybody, both sides. So
I think there's another aspect of it as well. When you're comparing these two examples that we use with Julianne Genter and that sort of thing, and other examples right and left, I think there is a really clear example here of the left apologize straight away.
Yeah.
And the right do not.
Yeah.
They wait until they have absolutely no option to apologize. And part of this is I think the left apologize sometimes when they shouldn't.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And I always use the example of the American politician whose name I always forget, and someone always puts in the chat for me, the guy who used to write for Saturday Night Live, the comedian guy who was caught doing a cheeky, inappropriate photo from the 1980s where he was doing this over.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I mean,
perfect example.
I mean, ick, yuck, whatever, but he never actually did anything. Al Franken, see, straight away, thanks, guys. He never actually did anything. He never committed a sexual, and he just resigned straight away. And I think that was detrimental to American politics. But I
absolutely agree.
Yeah. But that was in the middle of the Me Too, so maybe there's a bit more reality check there as to why he did it. But yeah, the left seem to fall on their swords far more quickly. And I look at it from one sense and I go, well, that's kind of honorable. But I look at it from another sense and we go, the right we say this all the time, the right will just play the dirtiest game ever to win no matter what. The left will be happy with a loss as long as they've played a good game. And I find that frustrating.
And just to clarify here, I wish the left didn't apologize so much does not apply in this Julianne Genter thing. I think front-footing it and applying apologizing instantly and owning it was 100% the way to play it. And I think when you're looking at Green Party, just the way the Green Party act, when you're trying to build a story around, say, non-transparency out of the Green Party policies and procedures, you're barking up the wrong tree. They are the most transparent party to their detriment at times of any party that's in the House. I also want to highlight a comment just to sort of illustrate the point of the difference, the way that people talk about female MPs. And Cliff, I am going to highlight a comment that I saw talking about Chloe. Makeup. Oh my God, is that her? We don't say things like that about male MPs, and I guarantee you that every clip that we have shown of a male MP in front of Jack Tame or in any media interview, they're wearing makeup as well. If you are on camera, you are wearing makeup. But that's just a little point. You know, same commenter, Goras was entitled. It's simple, very basic, but true. It's not complex. It fucking is.
Yeah, it can be.
There is more to what went on there than most of us would ever experience.
All right. Listen, we're gone over tonight, only by like double the length of our normal show we pretend it to be.
As was pointed out in the chat, only because Beardy Daddy and Beardy Daddy were fighting. Oh, I got informed because I made the comment that we're two bears on a podcast. I got told that no, we're not two bears. It's a bear and an otter.
What's an otter again?
And I hadn't heard that term before.
Oh no, I've heard it before. But I can't remember.
Familiar with bear. I had to Google what that meant.
Yeah.
And God damn it, I'm the otter.
What is it again? Tell us all.
An otter is like a smaller bear.
Oh,
You're obviously the bear. I'm the smaller of the two. So I'm the otter.
Hey, listen, it's time for us to go, but we're gonna do this last story. It'll only take a couple of minutes. Because it's quite an interesting one, and I'm sure we'll follow up on it. And I've spoken to the people today who it's involved. I saw on the lovely Calvin Morgan's Twitter feed today a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one. Thoughts and prayers go out to the attendees of today's Inflection Point event featuring Brian Tamaki, who have, according to Turf, Katrina Biggs, been literally starved for food choices after Takina Zephyr Cafe chose to stand by in solidarity with their trans whānau and close for the day. The tweet from Ms. Biggs says, this is the privately run cafe in the Takina Event Centre where the Inflection Point Summit is being held today. It has been shut down, apparently, in, quote, solidarity with the trans community, end quote. What an unbelievably puerile thing to do. It's actually pretty laughable. Here's the original post from Zephyr Cafe and Bar. I want to do this as well because we all know what's going to be in their inbox today. In fact, if you look at their...
I was going to say they're getting review bombed.
Yeah, the reviews at the moment, there are 1 out of 5 based on 9 reviews or something. So we could go do the opposite if you want, people. In support of our trans community, we have chosen to close from 10 a.m. this Saturday. It will be open again 8:30 a.m. on Sunday, sending aroha to our trans whānau. And let me just go and show you what we mean about being review bombed. Where do I find the reviews?
The Google one's getting absolutely hammered.
Oh, this is as well. Is it up here? Dun, 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 dun. I saw them before. Now I'm going all boomer. Oh, they're there. Rating that site. Rating. You know. Oh, good. People are starting to go the other way. Oh, look, they all are. Look, gosh, this is all happening recently, obviously, because before that it was. I very much doubt the staff actually throw poo as Sean Plunkett's fan club claim, but coffee is good also. They have to go to the end because people are obviously coming back the other way now.
And I mean, anybody that knows hospitality, like how many queer folk work in hospitality?
Well, let's get to that. We'll get to that because that's a part of it. I've had a statement from the owner. Terrible service. The coffee was burnt and there was a funky smell. So this is all happening. Look, 13 hours ago. This is all because of that. Go woke, go broke. Coffee is gross. So the other thing that happened in that same time was Mayor Tori Whanau went to the protest outside. And this is an Instagram post from Tori. Trans Lives Matter. I was glad to stand in solidarity and love for our trans whānau against the hate perpetrated by groups who have no business bringing their dangerous views here. We are a diverse city of love and inclusion, and we will not tolerate those who aim to further marginalize groups that need support the most. To all of our rainbow whānau, I will always stand by your side with love and pride. I've been speaking with the owner of the cafe today. I'm just going to take this down because I'm going to drag my email across, and it's not appropriate that I put his email up on screen just so I can see it because my old eyes won't see that far. Where basically he's been saying they made a decision. They weren't going to make any public statements, but they weren't going to be interviewed, but they were going to put a statement out. And obviously they have been, the inbox has been pretty hit pretty hard. And so this is their statement, and I'll read it to you. And this is what the cafe said themselves. Zephyr Cafe is committed to providing a safe and inclusive environment for both customers and our team, which is what you were just talking about, Tori, which I said we can address that. We stand with the LGBT community against discrimination. We reserve the right to protest against Brian Tamaki and his views. We chose to close on Saturday to show that we do not support the views held by the Inflection Point organisers. We also have a duty of care to keep our staff safe, many of whom are part of the LGBT community, following the undertaking of a health and safety risk assessment around the event, and for the health and safety of staff on site, as well as the standard enjoyment of cafe patrons, we deemed this was not at acceptable levels. That's the official statement released by Zephyr Cafe. And that is it, people, for the night.
Yep. We're not fighting.
Here we are. That was great. The only one I saw that went past was someone going, "I love it when the hosts argue." You're on the wrong show. You should go watch something.
Just a little bit of the croutons and the salad there.
All right. Is there anything else you want to get to before we go? Because you know the rules. Oh, there's one. Gareth has got a super chat in there. What does it say? I've always assumed Chewy was a total disappointment fan. Disappointment fan?
Yeah, what's that?
I don't understand. It's in capital letters. Oh, a fan of it. What? Must be a
something
band
called a total disappointment.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he's talking about the T-shirt. No, it's Amigo the Devil.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So it's the show that I went to the other week. Look, we've got to pull the plug on this because we've got to edge you guys to the first ever 2-hour, 1-hour show.
Oh, and you've got someone home with you for the first time in 6 weeks. So we should let Chewy's partner's been away for 6 weeks.
I'm out.
Yeah, so you got to go. All right, team. Thanks for joining us tonight. Oh, actually, we've got to play the song to go out on.
Go play the song.
We've got to play the song to go out on. So sheesh, I got to get it ready. And so I'll play this, Chewy, and you can go away. And this is our new closing credits. And thanks to all our patrons. And we'll see you tomorrow night from that one there. Tomorrow night from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Thank you, team. See you soon. Hooroo.
Pick up the news. Big hairy style. Keep it loose. News feeders. Where the politics play. They bring the truth. Every single day. Talking about the mess. All over the land. They shine a light. With a mic in their hand.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's something wrong with the credits. They're not scrolling through. Not entirely sure why this is not going on.
And no time for cheese, just facts.
Oh, no.
Sorry, I screwed up with the credits.
Wrong.
So we're just going to go. We'll fix it up for tomorrow night. Thanks, team. All the best. We'll catch you tomorrow night from 9. I'll make sure I've got them fixed. Hooroo.